There's a large Brandon Sanderson bias that currently exists in fantasy. I've played into it, and I think a lot of it is actually earned. Brandon Sanderson is great. If you're one of these people who denies that Brandon Sanderson is a good or great fantasy author, I have no idea where you're pulling from. I'm not denying that he might not be your taste. If he's not your taste, that's fine. Kingkiller Chronicles is not my taste. That's fine. But to deny that he is putting out consistently high quality work at a rate that is previously, as far as I'm concerned, in fantasy and epic fantasy, not really been seen before, is silly. He's doing that, and people love it. But there's another flip side of that, where many people are claiming Brandon Sanderson is the greatest of all time, aka the GOAT. In this video, I just want to briefly talk about which side I think is right, spoiler alert, both, and which side I think is wrong, spoiler alert, both. Now, the last time I really talked about Brandon Sanderson in depth, I jumped into the Stormlight Archive, and I did talk about him possibly being the greatest of all time, but I added a lot of caveats to that, where I said he needs to finish his works first. We need more distance from his works. We need to be able to figure out if his ideas and themes age well, and if what he is saying within his stories will resonate well in history. I know that sounds corny, but that's a real thing. For example, Tolkien had a lot to say within The Lord of the Rings, and I don't have enough time in this video to really dive in deep, but an incredibly boiled down, reduced version of Tolkien's philosophy was a very post-World War I European cynical view towards the industrialization and the age of man. And while many of us may not agree with Tolkien's overall philosophy there, it's very understandable where it comes from, and it's aged very well because it's an interesting idea that holds up over time. He was never trying to hit you over the head with his message. The Lord of the Rings can be read without diving into that idea as a beautiful story, and I think Brandon has actually done a remarkable job of doing that as well. I've done a lot of thinking and talking about Brandon Sanderson's themes and ideas that he seems to push forward in his works. I do think it varies quite a bit depending on which series you're jumping into. That's why I really dislike the accusation that is thrown towards Brandon repeatedly online that he's somehow trying to peddle Mormonism to his readers. I'm not going to get into the guy's personal life, but I've seen plenty of evidence, as well as read almost everything he's put out, that I do not see that being the case. There are occasional things that can be read as being influenced by a story that's probably been very influential to his life, but at no point does he seem to be trying to convert anyone to Mormonism. So what is he trying to preach? Well, there's a lot of typical fantasy messages. The underdog coming up against the empire, the big bad, the good outweighing evil, and those are explored as we've seen before in fantasy. They're done well, but nothing really new brought to the table. So what is Brandon taking to the table? To answer that question, I'd like to bring up the fact that one of the compliments that is leveled towards Brandon most often is that his work is remarkably easy to read. And I think that's actually because of what Brandon's real focus for the reader is. Brandon Sanderson is hyper-focused on the individual experiencing these epic events around them and the ramifications of those events on that person. And I think that is crucial for how Brandon draws in his reader. Every story the man writes feels intimate. You are following these characters so closely, and you are going through their mental processing of the events around them on a level that many authors fail to do. This can be seen most bluntly in Brandon's seemingly repeated inclusion of mental illness within his characters. Mild spoiler alerts for his works, but whether it's Kaladin dealing with depression, Dalinar dealing with PTSD, Vin dealing with anxiety, depression, and arguably a little bit of PTSD, Brandon is focusing on the real-world ramifications of these epic, huge events, whether you're a dog of war in the past, someone who's come up from the streets, or a former slave, what that effect will have on the character, especially when they're suddenly thrown into these larger, grander plots where their experience and their will have effect on the world around them. Now, this is not really a philosophy like we saw from Tolkien, or even one like we saw from Robert Jordan, where his was a more realistic take on farmers being brought into an epic fantasy world. What would the real human reaction be to epic fantasy events? I think Brandon's taking a similar approach, but to a more detailed and even more realistic reaction, where he will have the actual mental illness well realized and then the star focus of the story. This is repeatedly why I've said Brandon is clearly so influenced by Robert Jordan. They're both hyper-focused on the individual. But I think Brandon is doing so to an even greater degree than Jordan has done previously. Now, I'm aware that there are other things that make Brandon Sanderson so readable and reach a mass audience as well, whether it's his just very straightforward and comfortable writing style, or the way he cuts down on descriptions that a lot of authors would take a lot more time for. Brandon's focus for descriptions is often on the things the reader find the most enjoyable, like magic systems, the direct thoughts of the character, and the action. So what does all this have to do with Brandon Sanderson being the greatest of all time? Is he the GOAT? I think he has the potential to be, but right now we're still seeing an author who has a wonderful idea, something that he could certainly take to a place that could raise the entire fantasy genre and have rippling effects across literature. But the guy is just entering his heyday. Brandon is just getting to the point where we're seeing his biggest ideas come to fruition. We don't know if they will be dropped entirely. We still have Mistborn Era 3. We still have most of the Stormlight Archive. It's incredibly impressive for what he's accomplished. So the people who are saying he might be the GOAT, he certainly could be. He could bring these ideas to a level we have never seen before. Before I used a boxing metaphor to talk about Brandon's status as the GOAT, and I wanted to just make the point that he should be in the debate, and I still stand by that. The guy should be in the debate, especially, like I said in my previous video, 20, 30 years from now. If the consistent quality and rate of publication we've seen from the guy keeps up. But to anyone right now who is saying that Brandon Sanderson is hands down the greatest fantasy author of all time, I disagree. I'd say he has a lot of potential. He's currently the hot young shot coming in, and I'd love to see him keep at the quality he's currently at. He can be your personal favorite, and he's one of my personal favorites, without a doubt. But this conversation is one I think we should have, because contextualizing an author's work is crucial in examining yourself as a reader, as well as the author as a writer. I think time and distance from the work's publication also really help in gauging how well it holds up, obviously, and whether or not the author really had a point and what they were saying landed. I think that's why we still see entire classes in college devoted to the philosophies of Lord of the Rings. Meanwhile, the Chronicles of Narnia have more just descended into, yeah, those were great and kind of influential, but we've seen those themes done before. They haven't really echoed into modern society, and yeah, that was really it. Not adding hate to Chronicles of Narnia, I'm just saying one's message is still something to discuss and debate in modern literature, while the other just seem to be retreading Christian themes that we've seen a million times before. Brandon's ideas of individuality in extreme circumstances certainly do resonate with a lot of what we are seeing today, but will this debate just die off and be something that's answered and we never really talk about in the future, or will it continue on forever? Probably the latter. Probably the latter. It seems like something that'll be in the zeitgeist for a long time and has been. So just to wrap things up, he's not the greatest yet. He could be down the road. That's my take on it. I'd love to hear your response in the comments down below. Do you think Brandon actually does have the potential to be GOAT for the fantasy genre? Or no, he's just a wonderkind who might be a flash in the pan? Or do you hate him? Do you think Brandon's just overhyped to the point where you're like, no, he's awful, I hate him? I look forward to the conversation this video will spike in the comment section. I'm sure some people are gonna hate it. I'm sure some people are really, really gonna hate it, because there's always those people. Anyway, guys, if you've not already, like and subscribe. Hit the Patreon if you want to support what I do here. And have a good one, y'all. Peace.